Hello and welcome back to On The Grid Podcast, Season 5, Episode 18, and we are back reviewing the Monaco Grand Prix. Joining with me as ever is Adam. How did you find Monaco? Did you find it exciting, the glitz and the glamour, or did you find it a bit of a snooze fest?
Exciting, really? Monaco is never exciting. The only exciting bit about Monaco is qualifying. And literally that is it. Apart from that, it was a literal procession. We may as well have watched a funeral instead of Monaco because it was that boring. It was literally a snooze fest. I mean, the only entertaining part of Monaco was Mercedes and Williams going back and forth with James Vowles and Toto Wolff. I think that was the only bit that excited me. But I mean, the even varying the where they had to make two stops, it got to the point where the gap between the drivers in the midfield was that great that some could make a free pit stop. We'll talk a little bit more about it later on when we're doing our average driver ratings, but for me, it was a literal snooze fest.
Yeah, I do agree. As iconic as Monaco is, the racing is not it, is it? But anyway, we'll get into that later on in this episode. First thing, we'll kick things off with Q1. And I think one of the big talking points is, although he qualified for Q2, Kimi Antonelli going into the wall, coming out of the tunnel at the chicane there, he just clips the inside barrier, and then from there it was a bit of a passenger, wasn't he?
Yeah, well, I think especially with Kimi Antonelli and a few of the other drivers, they've obviously not driven F1 machinery at all around Monaco. The likes of Behrman, the likes of Bortoletto. You've got a few other drivers, Lawson, Hadjar, etc. It's a minor mistake, but I mean, as soon as you do something as silly as that, and you clip the barrier or you clip anything, the walls are so tight in Monaco. It's you kind of not escaping them at all. So as soon as you make a mistake, it's game over. But yeah, for Kimi Antonelli and for Mercedes as a whole, qualifying was disappointing, and the Sunday obviously transpired to be very disappointing for the Mercedes outfit. But I mean, it's a rookie mistake around Monaco. His first ever time around Monaco, so it's likely to happen. And what happened was he got through to Q2, but obviously he wasn't able to participate in it because of that mistake.
Yeah, he was safely through, but he was strong a little bit compared to Russell. I don't think he necessarily enjoyed his first time at Monaco. But, like you said, he is a rookie at the end of the day, and we do have to bear that in mind. He's had a tremendous start in Formula One, so I think a mistake or two was bound to happen eventually. Also, one of the big talking points was that we had Lance Stroll knocked out in Q1, a big talking point considering whether you look at his teammate, the upgrades Aston Martin brought. Any comment on Stroll?
Do we need to comment on him, especially with what he did to Leclerc in free practice? When it comes to Lance Stroll, I think the bar just goes lower and lower. Obviously, was handed that grid penalty because of what happened with Leclerc in free practice, where he was off the racing line and then decided to go back on the racing line and just collide with Leclerc, which was bamboozling to say the least. But Lance Stroll doing Lance Stroll things. Nothing changes really.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, he already had a one-place grid penalty for a crazy move in practice. To get a grid penalty in practice is impressive. And then he done the exact same thing in qualifying as well. I think it was to Gasly this time. This was coming out of the tunnel. He's done the exact same thing. He's let a car through, and then he's just immediately diverted back onto the racing line when there's another car coming. Just absolutely ridiculous. I think, did he get a three-place penalty for that, or was that for something else? It was, yeah. So that took him from 19th to 19th. Ollie Behrman also received a penalty. So although I think he was actually improving on his last run in Q1, but I think Esteban Ocon was in danger of being knocked out. So he bailed on that lap, which was probably the smart thing to do, although he did get knocked out in Q1 still. It saved Esteban Ocon, who ended up having a tremendous qualifying. As we go on to Q2, and obviously Antonelli was confirmed starting 15th, and then right at the start of qualifying, George Russell, losing power through the tunnel, had to park up. And it did make for a bit of a comical moment when the marshals were trying to push the car along down the hill. So not a good day for Mercedes.
Yeah, I alluded to it with Kimi Antonelli that Mercedes certainly did not have a weekend to remember in Monaco. Usually they run very well. I mean, Lewis Hamilton, a few-time winner at Monaco. And it's a shame really because they've been in good form and they've really been, taking their kind of early season form into their stride and George Russell and Kimi Antonelli are, battling to with for podiums and top five places, but in Monaco it just seemed to evaporate. Mercedes just completely lacked. Obviously, Antonelli made that mistake in Q1 and started 15th, and then George Russell lost power. It certainly wasn't a weekend to remember in Monaco for the Mercedes outfit, but it's just one of them weekends. It's a minor blip in the road. There's still a long way to go, and it's only a minor blip. Like I said, I don't think it'll affect him in the long term. Shall I say?
Yeah, you wouldn't have thought so. It's just an unfortunate situation for them. I think one of the big shocks, really, from Q2 was Carlos Sainz was eliminated. I think it was right on the cusp. There was sort of half a tenth in it, but he missed out in the end. Williams seemed to struggle this weekend slightly. Alex Albon, we'll get onto in a minute, only qualifying P10. And then obviously they had the struggles in the race, which were partly caused by other cars.
Could you say struggles? I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say struggles. I think they're below par from what they're expecting. The Williams, they're probably expecting a P7 or a P8 start with Carlos Sainz and Alex Albon. If you usually put your usual suspects in that top six equation, so the two McLarens, the two Mercedes, the two Ferraris, and then Verstappen. So they will be slightly disappointed, but I think at the end of the day, wherever you qualify in Monaco, it's likely to be where you finish. Like we saw last season, I don't think there weren't any moves up and down in the top 10. So if they're going by that equation and Alex Albon qualifies into Q3, it's all good. It's all well and good. But for Carlos Sainz, slightly unfortunate to be out qualified by his teammate. But it's the same as Mercedes. It's a little bit of a challenging track when it comes to obviously keeping it in between the barriers and not clashing into the barriers. You have to keep wary of that, and also it's just a little bit of a minor blip, I think, with Carlos Sainz jumping to Williams and obviously getting used to that machinery and driving around the streets of Monaco in not a Ferrari car and a Williams car. So it'll be slightly disappointed, but I don't think it's as bad as some people say.
So moving on to Q3 then, and it was a bit of a back and forth battle, really. It's all qualifying long between sort of Norris and Leclerc. Verstappen was getting involved at some points. But going into the final run, McLaren came out early with Norris and Piastri 1 and 2. They then improved on their final runs. Charles Leclerc then put his car onto provisional pole, but Lando Norris pipped him at the end by just over a tenth of a second. It was a great end to qualifying. Norris on pole from Leclerc.
I can't lie, I was fuming. I was actually fuming watching qualifying. I was hoping that McLaren would only do the one run, especially with them coming out, but they did one push, one cool down, and then one push again, and we saw Lando Norris on pole position once again for the first time in a long time, it seems. But it was a very good ending to qualifying, and that kind of was the entertainment for the weekend, really. The Q3 session, Norris ahead of Leclerc, ahead of Piastri, and ahead of Hamilton. Obviously, Lewis Hamilton got a three-place grid penalty because of what he did to Max Verstappen in qualifying, impeding him on his hot lap. So it was interesting to see Ferrari back in the hunt for pole position. Let's be honest, because I don't think that Ferrari have been anywhere near their best that they were last season, and this season it's not been a fantastic start. So just to see them in the fight for pole was exciting, but to miss out on pole by such a small margin was a little bit saddening. But Lando Norris, well worth his money. Fantastic pole position lap and a new track record around Monaco. Plopping his car into the 1 minute 9. So it's an impressive lap. You can't take away from him, but it's just a bit of a saddening fact that Leclerc couldn't get pole position from a Ferrari fan's perspective.
Yeah, I think Leclerc's got 3 pole positions in Monaco before, which would have given him a 4th, which I think would have been a joint record for at Monaco, which is phenomenal to say. When you consider sort of his luck around Monaco as well, when I think there's on at least one occasion he hasn't started that race, but Norris pipped Leclerc in the end, and then Oscar Piastri had to settle for 3rd place with Lewis Hamilton qualifying 4th, as we said, but there was a bit of an issue in Q1, I think it was, with Max Verstappen losing 3 places through a penalty. I was a bit shocked at that penalty. I think we were messaging each other when it came through. I thought it would be a 1-place grid penalty. They would just drop him behind Verstappen, and that would be that, given that Verstappen qualified 5th. Very frustrating when he will hunt for a podium otherwise.
I'm sorry, but the rules are the rules. We saw what happened with Lance Stroll, and he got a 3-place grid penalty, and he was impeding Pierre Gasly. So, if you're impeding another driver in qualifying, it's a 3-place grid penalty. It's as simple as that. It's annoying for Lewis Hamilton because he looked very quick, in qualifying. But like I mentioned, the rules are the rules, unfortunately, and Lewis Hamilton was on the wrong end of the rules when, he looked so good in qualifying and on the hunt for potentially a podium on the Sunday. But it's unfortunate for Hamilton. Yeah, you can't really argue with the rules, unfortunately, when Lance Stroll got given a 3-place grid penalty. So unfortunately, it had to be a 3-place grid penalty also for Lewis Hamilton.
I think what's most frustrating is the fact that Hamilton didn't actually do anything wrong. It was a communication error between him and the pit wall, not telling him that Verstappen was on a quick lap. They said he was on a slow lap. So they're very disappointed. And then dropped in behind Verstappen, Hadjar, and Alonso. Hadjar qualifying 6th, as we said, 1 millisecond ahead of Alonso. Esteban Ocon in 8th, Liam Lawson 9th, and Alex Albon 10th, rounding up the top 10 positions in qualifying. So if we move on now to our 1 to 10 ratings, and we'll kick things off with the man who led pretty much every session, won in qualifying and won the race. It's a 10 out of 10 for Mr. Lando Norris.
Well, okay, let me prove you wrong in one sense. Leclerc led every session in free practice. He led FP1, FP2, and FP3. In qualifying, Lando Norris only led Q2 and Q3. So, when it mattered, Lando Norris delivered. And when it mattered in a race, he held on to his race lead. In the dying embers, he was getting put under a little bit of pressure from Leclerc and Piastri, but it's never in doubt around the streets of Monaco. When you start on pole, you usually win from pole. So, yeah, 10 out of 10, agreed. Can't really say anything else, really. It was textbook. It was a good race from Lando Norris. He obviously did have that lock up into turn 1, and we could have seen what happened in the Formula 2 feature race when we had a multiple car pile up caused by Alex Dunn, but that didn't happen. Lando Norris came out unscathed and carried on his merry way to a fine victory around the Principality.
Yeah, I was going to mention that actually because it was a massive lockup, and I think it was Oscar Piastri said in the post-race debrief that he thought he was in the wall. I think I thought he was in the wall as well because it was a lot of smoke coming from the front tyre. It was a big lockup. And he's lucky that sort of Leclerc didn't get a better start almost, and he wiped him out as well. And we had a repeat of the feature race in the F2, like you said. But yes, clear 10 out of 10. And next up, Charles Leclerc. It's another 10 out of 10 for me. I don't think he could have got anything more out of that car. I think he pretty much got the maximum performance out of the car. And he's just unlucky that it's a track where you couldn't overtake because he was looking all over the back of Norris. He was brilliant in qualifying. And from where we thought the Ferraris would be before the race, before practice, sorry, it was a pleasant result.
On my notes, I've got written down 9, but that's purely because I'm salty because Leclerc didn't get the win. And from hearing your wise words, I'm going to settle with it. I'm going to agree with you because, like you mentioned, we didn't expect the Ferraris to be up there and challenging for a podium, never mind a victory. So it's a welcome sign for the two of us. But it's just a little bit of an annoying factor when Leclerc could have and should have been on pole position and could have and should have gotten a race victory. But from where we thought they would be to Leclerc finishing on the podium, I agree with you. So I'll also settle for a 10 out of 10.
Yeah, I'm surprised that you actually went for a 9 initially. I thought you'd be all over the 10 bandwagon. Oscar Piastri next, obviously qualified third and finished third. I think it's the most 8 out of 10 performance that we could actually really give, because he's taken a bit of a hit in the championship. He's now only 3 points ahead of Lando Norris. Good, solid, but you can't give him any higher because he was really struggling in qualifying. I think he was actually probably a little bit lucky to be as high as he was in the end. It's a podium. It's nothing to be sniffed at, but yeah, he didn't have the pace when it mattered.
No, I've still gone for a very strong 9 out of 10. I think the performance for Oscar Piastri, yes, it's disappointing that he's lost so much ground on Lando Norris in the championship. But I think if any driver is to outqualify him, A, it's Charles Leclerc because he knows these streets like the back of his hand, and B, it is Lando Norris's teammate who's in exactly the same car as him. So, like you mentioned, a podium isn't anything to be sniffed about, and it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that he's not higher than a P3 and like a P2 or a P1, which are the only two places higher. I don't know where I'm going with that, but for him, he has taken a bit of a knock in the championship, but I think he maximised everything that he could have. And like I mentioned, the only two drivers that could have beaten him did beat him. So in essence, I don't think he's got anything to be really worried about. And I think it's still a very, very strong performance.
And Max Verstappen up next. He qualified in fourth and finished fourth. Again, I've gone for an 8 out of 10. It was a solid performance, like for Piastri. But again, I think that he left a bit on the table in qualifying. I don't think he improved on his final run. And if you look at Q1 and Q2, he was right up there with Norris and Leclerc. They looked like the three favourites throughout qualifying. And then in the end, he could only manage fifth on the road and fourth with Hamilton's penalty. He obviously done his best to try and create something, try and make something happen at the end there. Waiting until the penultimate lap to pit and back in sort of Norris, Leclerc and Piastri together. But there was nothing doing for him. His race was written by qualifying like so many others. So yeah, but he's performed to a really high standard. So you just wonder with the new directive for Spain coming out this weekend, whether Red Bull can make up some ground on the McLarens, because he's only 25 points off the lead.
Yeah, for Verstappen, I'll agree with you on an 8 out of 10. I think as soon as he made his first pit stop, I think he was a long way away. And he even admitted himself they were waiting for a safety car, a red flag to kind of neutralise the race and get himself back into contention. But it's hard to grade these drivers because we're basically grading them purely based on qualifying. And, when you're not able to combine the Saturday and the Sunday together, it's very, very hard. And for Verstappen, a P4 finish is a very good finish, especially when you're thinking he's beaten Lewis Hamilton, he's beaten the two Mercedes who are way off. So it's hard, but in Monaco terms, it is an 8 out of 10 performance. It's a good performance. He's a long way away from the podium, but a long way in front of Lewis Hamilton in fifth. It kind of had a bit of a nothing race, really, because of the two pit stops and him gambling for a red flag or a safety car. So it's sort of like you mentioned for Oscar Piastri for probably the most 8 out of 10 performance I've seen. It's good, don't get me wrong, but it's nowhere near the podium.
And up next is Lewis Hamilton. He qualified in seventh and finished fifth. I've gone for a 7 out of 10. for Hamilton. Unfortunately, I think it would have been a whole different race if he started in fourth. I think it would have been a very different race if he started in fourth. But unfortunately, that grid penalty set him back because by the time he actually came out of the first pit stops and came out in front of Ocon and Hadjar and Alonso, he was sort of 15 seconds behind Verstappen, which then he lost another 15 seconds getting through the traffic. So yeah, it was a very lonely race, but I do think that if he was in the fight for a podium, he started from fourth, then we might have been able to see him do something different or at least fight Piastri for that last podium position. But it's a 7 out of 10 as it is.
Yep, I agree with you on that one for Lewis Hamilton. It's a 7 out of 10. And once again, another driver that we've got to purely based on the mistake in qualifying and him having a grid penalty. Because, like you mentioned, if he was to start in fourth, I think it's a completely different ball game. Two McLarens, two Ferraris going head to head. It would be a lot more tasty than Leclerc having to fend off Piastri behind and then trying to fight Norris in front. But for Lewis Hamilton, the only the degrading factor of most, he finished it close to 50 seconds behind Lando Norris. And when he's made that pit stop, that second pit stop, he's a long way behind Verstappen, and him having to clear traffic as well just puts him nowhere near in contention for a P4 or even a podium. So it's hard on Lewis Hamilton because he had a very good Q3 session and should have started fourth if it wasn't for that, impeding with Max Verstappen in qualifying and him getting a grid penalty. But the writing's on the wall, and you have to follow the rules as they are. So it's unfortunate where he starts. He makes up ground on Hadjar and Alonso, who retired. But as soon as you make up ground and have them pit stops, the top four are nowhere to be seen, and that was the writing on the wall for Lewis Hamilton. Had a very lonely race and finished in fifth. So yeah, it's a 7 out of 10 from me.
And next up is Isaac Hadjar. He qualified in fifth and finished sixth, and it is the easiest 10 out of 10 ever, I think. A phenomenal performance. I think this has been coming for a few races. He's put in some strong performances. And there would have been a day where he, does something phenomenal, and I think this was it. To finish sixth, obviously he was assisted by Lawson, his teammate. I don't think that can go unnoticed. But qualifying up in sixth, then starting fifth, he was phenomenal all race, and he fully deserves the result.
Yeah, can we just give a round of applause to Liam Lawson, because the team play on display between the two RBs and the two Williams, who we'll get onto in a second, was fantastic. I mean, Liam Lawson assisted Isaac Hadjar, and then Alex Albon and Carlos Sainz sort of assisted each other and got themselves into the points. So, it's not what we realistically wanted from a two-stop strategy when it came to Monaco. A bit of a procession and drivers keeping others behind because of the limited overtaking opportunities in Monaco. But RB played an absolute blinder with Isaac Hadjar and Liam Lawson holding the pack behind, and he was able to have 2-3 pit stops and finish in a fantastic P6. I think his highest finishing position, if I'm not mistaken, and he puts himself into the top 10 of a driver's standings. So, two rookies are thriving in Formula One in Kimi Antonelli and Isaac Hadjar. And if Isaac Hadjar does come knocking for the Red Bull job, please, Christian Horner and Helmut Marko, don't put him in a Red Bull seat for next season, because I think this talent would be wasted in a Red Bull car next season. I think it would be way too early for him to jump in. But stranger things have happened at the Red Bull team. But in Monaco, he was absolutely fantastic, assisted by Liam Lawson, and gets himself a lovely amount of points and places himself inside the top 10 of the championship.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving on to Esteban Ocon, who qualified in eighth and finished seventh, and it's a 9 out of 10 from me. I think it's maybe a bit harsh not to give him a 10. But I'm going for a 9 because I think there was the potential to finish slightly higher up. Seventh is still a fantastic performance, but it does go to show that Haas will either finish sort of seventh or eighth or last. and there's not much in between. A great performance from Ocon, and I think after a few poor races, it is what he needed. But yeah, back into the points, and he seems to like Monaco. So another great performance here.
You say he likes Monaco. Can we just rewind to what happened last year when him and Gasly clashed? But then we go back another season when he finished on the podium, and you called me a lunatic for not giving him a 10 out of 10. How have you not given him a 10 out of 10 for a performance like this? I, I, I cannot fathom how you've not given him a 10 out of 10 purely on the basis that what happened with Liam Lawson and Isaac Hadjar was pre-planned already. Esteban Ocon was in on it and kind of stayed behind. But to finish seventh after, having so many poor races and there has been, either useless or absolutely amazing, just goes to show that Esteban Ocon was on it, was completely on it in Monaco. And I think it is a 10 out of 10. I don't think it can be anything less because if we're giving Isaac Hadjar a 10, we have to give Esteban Ocon a 10 because the two cars are comparable and they finished Esteban Ocon finished one position behind the Hadjar. So I think, the writing's on the wall here, both 10 out of 10s from my perspective anyway.
It was a great performance, but I'm not giving him like a six. I'm still giving him a 9 out of 10. It was still a very, very good performance. I think that
Yeah, okay.
Hadjar was the best of the rest. Ocon was the car behind the best of the rest. And up until his retirement, Alonso was running higher. So you got to think, would you give him a 10 out of 10 for an eighth? Possibly not. Given that
Yeah.
Lawson was the Ministry of Defence and deserves a knighthood for the way he helped Hadjar out in that race. That's my thinking. But it's still a great performance. It's still a 9 out of 10.
Well, let's move on to Liam Lawson then, I suppose. I mean, yeah, don't get me wrong. I agree with your points, but I think if we give one driver a 10 out of 10 because his teammate absolutely helped him, I think we should give a 10 out of 10 to the other driver because his teammate was nowhere to be seen and he couldn't have that helping hand. So, that's just my perspective. That's just my opinion. It will average itself out, when we do our two averages. But that's just my opinion.
Anyway, moving on to Liam Lawson, who qualified in ninth and finished eighth. And I've gone for a 9 out of 10 as well because of the fact that he started ninth. He has handed his teammate a fantastic result on a silver platter, and then he's still finished eighth. It's brilliant. You thought maybe because he's actually sacrificing his race completely, he could finish sort of 15th, 16th, and you'd still give him like a 6 out of 10. But a brilliant performance. This is exactly the type of result he needed. Quick in qualifying, finished ninth, and could have been higher as well. I don't think he was far off sort of seventh or eighth. But then the absolute S-housery to hold everybody up by about 50 seconds, let Hadjar get both of his pit stops out of the way, and then to still finish in the points is sacrificing your race, but then still producing a brilliant result.
You know what? You know what? You talked about at the beginning of the episode, am I going to rain 10 out of 10s? And you know what? I'm raining another 10 out of 10 here. This purely down to the defensive capabilities of Liam Lawson, a driver who was completely devoid of confidence after being chucked out of Red Bull and not having any points finishes. And he's just been able to help his teammate to a P6 finish. And like you mentioned, he could have finished 15th and we could have been talking about a 6 or 7 out of 10 because of his helping hand in Isaac Hadjar's aid to a P6 finish. But the guy's only finished 2 places behind him in 8th. It goes without saying, this is another 10 out of 10. Isaac Hadjar, yes, he finished ahead of him and well ahead of him, but it is purely down to Liam Lawson's defensive masterclass that he has finished 2 places ahead of him and in 6th with his highest F1 finish. Case closed. It's a 10 out of 10 from me, and I think that's it for me for raining 10 out of 10s. I think this will be the last one.
Moving on to Alex Albon, qualified in 10th and finished ninth. It's an 8 out of 10 for me. Solid, as we come to expect from Alex Albon this season. I definitely can't give him any higher. But again, he did sort of the team game as well. They both did. Sainz slowed down to allow Albon to pit, get his pit stop out of the way, and then they swapped over. So Albon done the same for Sainz. So a good bit of teamwork. Alonso's retirement meant they both got points as well. But what could have been a bit of an awkward situation for Williams ended up being a good result, getting both cars in the points.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've also gone with an 8 out of 10 for Alex Albon. And, the two Williams, especially just like the two RBs, worked very well in tandem together to get themselves into the points. It was obviously for Fernando Alonso's retirement that the two of them got points and not just for one of them. But yeah, a good result. Not exactly, the result that Williams would have wanted. Or would have wanted to maximise their potential that they're holding back. I guess. And if they were able to nail the qualifying down to a T, they could have easily finished ahead of Hajar and Lawson and Ocon. And obviously, if overtaking was an opportunity, then I think the two Williams drivers finish ahead of a trio in front of them. But it's still a good display, very good teamwork, and like we mentioned, both finished in a point. So I think it's all in all, it's definitely a good day for Williams.
Yeah, absolutely. And Carlos Sainz up next. Speaking of Williams, he qualified in 11th and finished 10th. I've gone for a 7 out of 10, just one lower on the basis that he qualified behind Albon. That's basically my thinking. I've got to give Albon the higher grade. So yeah, that's why it's only one difference as well.
Yep, agreed on that one as well. I don't think you can really add much on that. From what we've already said about the Williams pairing, Carlos qualified behind Albon and finished behind Albon, so it's automatically a 1 point lower than his teammate ahead of him. But like I mentioned, still a very very good weekend for Williams to get both cars in the points once again.
And now on to the cars finishing outside the points. George Russell qualified 14th and finished 11th. I've gone for a 6 out of 10 because you can't blame him for his qualifying result, but you also can't give him any higher than a 6. He finished fifth in Q1, and realistically, without that engine issue, he's qualified at least sort of seventh. And I don't think that's unfair to say. So if he qualifies seventh, he finishes within the top 7 without a doubt. And then you're looking at a higher grade. But he was absolutely unable to fight at all, not really able to make up any positions. And in the end, he done the right thing, cut the chicane, take the drive-through penalty as well, and then still within a few laps able to actually build the gap up to be able to make the pit stop. Mercedes' strategy was absolutely woeful, but they didn't try anything at all. They didn't split the strategies like most teams did, or sacrifice one to help the other. They just kind of done nothing. So at the end, they had to get all their pit stops in a few laps because they waited right till the end. But yeah, I'm sure Russell will be really disappointed with this result after he's having a brilliant season. His first race not scoring points. But yeah, it's a frustrating one, but you can't really blame him too much.
Yeah, I've also gone for a 6 out of 10. He sort of made the most of a bad situation, really. And I think him manifesting a 10-second time penalty was only going to see the stewards give him a more severe penalty. But that I found that very quite comedic when the race directors and the race stewards gave him a drive through. But it's not his fault at all for the race for the way the race has unfolded in Monaco. He did the right thing. The only thing that bamboozles me with Mercedes is if you're allowing George Russell to do what he did by cutting the chicane, why are you not letting Kimi Antonelli do it? I think I mean we'll talk about it when we talk about Antonelli, but that really bamboozles me. But with Russell, yes, his point scoring streak has ended, but in an unfortunate manner because it wasn't his fault. It was mechanical issues. And if it wasn't for mechanical issues, like you mentioned, he's easily getting through to Q3. And we're talking about, him qualifying sixth potentially and getting himself another good dosage of points. And we'll probably be talking about an 8 out of 10 or something like that. But unfortunately, for what happened in qualifying and the mechanical issues, saw him finish just outside the points. It wasn't his fault, but he had to do what he had to do, race and just narrowly miss out on the points.
Up next is Ollie Bearman, who qualified in 20th and finished 12th. I'm going for a 6 out of 10 for Ollie Bearman. A good performance, but it goes to show what an aggressive strategy can do. So maybe next time Mercedes need to take notes. But he was never going to get any points after qualifying, after getting that 10 pace penalty. So disappointing for him, but a good performance. But again, a lot of that was through a good strategy. Obviously, there's no overtakes at all. Um, and also, you look at Antonelli and Tsunoda, who had to pit towards the end. There's two places right there. So I think he was actually about 14th or 15th before those late pit stops.
Hey, the two of them that you just mentioned had to pit, and he's made up places. So if you look at it on the flip of things, qualifying 20th and finishing 12th, he's made up 8 places by an aggressive strategy, and strategies work wonders, especially around Monaco. I've gone one higher than you. I've gone for a 7 out of 10. I think qualifying wasn't obviously going to be anything special after he got that 10 place grid penalty for a red flag infringement in practice. But he made the most of a bad situation. Started in last, got himself up to 12th, wasn't going to realistically get any points. But to finish 12th, especially from starting last in Monaco, it's an achievement in itself because the strategy played an absolute blinder for him and it paid dividends. So I've gone with a 7 out of 10. I think the racecraft is obviously going to be, nothing special when it comes to starting at the back of the grid, but his strategy helped him along the way, and he finished 2 places outside of points, so it's pretty good going.
Next is Franco Colapinto, who qualified in 18th and finished 13th. Now, I've gone for a 7 out of 10 for Colapinto because he was, very comparable with his teammate all weekend on the same pace, and then obviously finished 13th, whereas his teammate threw his race in the bin. Um, but yeah, for a second race in Formula One, well, this season in the Alpine, only his sort of like 11th race or something in Formula One. To come to Monaco in a new car, he's only driven last week for the first time and finished 13th. I thought it was an impressive performance. So yeah, Colapinto's done well here. I think he'll take a lot of confidence from this weekend.
I agree with you on a 7 out of 10. The confidence factor, I don't think will come from his qualifying performance because he actually qualified 20th, and the grid penalties boosted him up to 18th, but he still made up places because of a good strategy, making up 5 places from where he started. So all in all, I think he will take some confidence that the strategy from time to time at Alpine can work. And especially when he sees his teammate drivers race into the bin, it will give him slightly more confidence that he was able to finish in 13th, 5 places higher from where he started. So it's definitely a confidence booster, but I don't think many drivers will be getting confidence boosters from Monaco purely on the basis of it literally being a procession. And I will mention again, Monaco was literally a procession. But I think it's a good performance in the race, and a 7 out of 10 is a well deserved grade.
Next up is Gabriel Bortoleto, qualified in 16th and finished 14th. I've gone for a 6 out of 10. I think it's slightly above average for Bortoleto. He obviously beat his teammate, out qualified. Oh, he didn't out qualify him, did he? No. But a good solid result. Um, he made 3 pit stops as well, Bortoleto. So he went above and beyond the two-stop mandatory the mandatory 2 stops. And yeah, a 14th place around Monaco is pretty good, considering where that car is.
Yeah, I think what Gabriel Bortoleto was doing was trying out the new rules for Monaco 2026, which is the three stop strategy. And I think he did very well in finishing 14th and ahead of his teammate who outqualified him. I've gone with a six. It was a good performance, don't get me wrong. But I don't think he can be barking up the same tree of the likes of Ollie Behrman and Franco Colapinto, who finished ahead of him and started quite a bit behind him. So all in all, I think it's a good race weekend for Gabriel Bortoleto, knowing that Sauber are nowhere to be seen comparable to the rest of the field. But he was able to still finish ahead of Lance Stroll and his teammate and Tsunoda and Antonelli. So it's not all bad. But I think he was slightly getting to grips with a free stop strategy that is, I think it's agreed in principle actually that three stops are on the cards for 2026. So yeah, that's a latest scoop for you guys. Agreed deal in principle, three stops. That Gabriel Bortoleto tried at Monaco Grand Prix could be on the card in 2026. By the way, I'm joking.
Couldn't tell there for a second. Lance Stroll up next. He qualified in 19th and finished 15th. I've gone for a 2 out of 10 because he has got 4 places of grid penalties, which has bumped him from 19th to 19th, but his teammate has stuck it in P6. So I know we don't expect much from Lance Stroll, but when Alonso's putting it so high, he looked very comfortable in the points. And then sort of the erratic driving, like you watch when Leclerc's trying to one lap him, he's almost put him into the wall. It's just the standard of driving from this guy is not Formula One worthy. It is dangerous. He's moving all over the place. He's just so dangerous on a racetrack, especially somewhere like Monaco where the barriers are everywhere. Um, it's an absolutely woeful performance. Um, so yeah, P15 in the end, but like you said, you got Tsunoda and Antonelli who have actually pit at the end and caused himself basically thrown away their race when they were sort of 11th and 12th, I think it was, or maybe 12th and 13th.
Yeah, I've gone for a 4 out of 10. I think it's Lance Stroll worthy. I think if you ever think of a 4 out of 10, you think of Lance Stroll, and that's why I've given it him. I think he's when his teammate is so far ahead of him, and he had to unfortunately retire due to car issues, and it's unfortunate, but yeah, what is mind-boggling still, and I'm sticking by the statement still, and I've said it so many times. Lance Stroll is carrying Aston Martin at the moment, and it's so sad to see. It's you. The thing is, you guys won't see that Ethan shaking his head because this is all audio, but he shook his head, and it's facts, it's stats, it's there in writing and in print. Lance Stroll is currently carrying Aston Martin because of the points that he scored in the 2025 season, whereas Fernando Alonso has scored none. So the writing's there on the wall, and it's sad because of performance like these around Monaco when you're expecting, Aston Martin have bought upgrades and you're expecting high expectations around the team, especially after what they did in Imola in qualifying, and he just does what he does best and drives like an absolute maniac. So yeah, I've given him a 4 out of 10. And yeah, that's me ending my rant on Lance Stroll for this week.
Okay. Yes, he has got all the points for Aston Martin, but if we actually look at every single race performance, Alonso's been quicker at every single Grand Prix. So yes, he's got there's no points for good performances and all of that, but let's use a bit of common sense here. Lance Stroll is not carrying the team. He's benefiting from fortunate situations. And I
No,
don't think you say the same thing for Fernando Alonso when he's
I
qualified
don't
in
agree with you.
P6 and ends up having a mechanical failure when he's set to
I
get
do
at least a P7.
I do not agree with you. You've literally said there. good performances don't reward points. Lance Stroll drives like a maniac and gets the points that Aston Martin need. If Aston Martin didn't have the points that, Lance Stroll has handed to them, they'd be bottom because Fernando Alonso has no points. So potato to potato, add one to another. In essence, Lance Stroll is carrying Aston Martin this season because of his points. He may be a worse driver than Fernando Alonso, but because of his point scoring ability that he has done so far this season, he's carrying the team on his back. And it felt really tough to come out my throat, but it's facts. It's facts, as George Russell back in like 2019 would say, facts. And it is facts.
Moving on swiftly to Nico Hulkenberg. He qualified in 13th and finished 16th. Again, I've gone for a 6 out of 10. I think, he's qualified very well, and I think he was in the fight. I think he ended up doing quite a late pit stop. I think he was one of those that was just waiting for some sort of safety car or something. Not to be in the end for him, but a 6 out of 10. It's a solid performance. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, agreed. He outqualified his teammate, but finished behind his teammate, who made one more pit stop than he did. And in Monaco, if you're not able to hold on to position, it's a little bit of a kick in the teeth. But in a Sauber to finish ahead of a Red Bull and a Mercedes is nothing to be sniffed at, even though those two cars were woeful in the race and in qualifying. But every rainbow has its golden pot, and for Nico Hulkenberg, the golden pot was finishing ahead of a Red Bull and a Mercedes. So it's a 6 out of 10, but it wasn't anything amazing by a long stretch.
Uh, Yuki Tsunoda next, qualified 12th and finished 17th. It's a 4 out of 10 for me for Tsunoda. Again, like we said so many times, it's qualifying that dictates your race, and he's not had a good qualifying. He wasn't really anywhere, and then from there, his race is settled. I think he was quite aggressive on the strategy as well, which just didn't pay off. Um, so yeah, there's nothing really to write home about for Sonoda. I think he needs a couple of good performances under his belt to build up a bit more confidence again.
Yeah, 4 out of 10. I don't think I can really add more about Yuki Tsunoda because, like you said, if you don't have a good qualifying, it's almost certainly curtains for you in the race. Nothing else Tsunoda could have really done, and him actually finishing 17th is a bigger kick in the teeth because if he wasn't so aggressive on the strategy, he could have been, maybe challenging for a single point if it wasn't for that Williams kerfuffle. But instead of talking about a point, we're talking about finishing penultimate in the race. It's a kick in the teeth, and it will definitely dent his confidence a little bit. But I think whoever finishes outside the points in Monaco, it dents your confidence a little bit, nonetheless. So it's a stepping stone for Yuki Tsunoda, and like you mentioned, he's definitely going to need a couple of good performances to boost his confidence. But like we mentioned, if he qualifies woeful, your race is likely to be the same out to have the same outcome. So it's an unfortunate 4 out of 10 for him.
And then the last of the finishers, Kimi Antonelli, the first man to get lapped 3 times in a Grand Prix since Nikita Mazepin. I've gone for a 4 out of 10. I don't think it was his weekend. He's obviously given himself shot himself in the foot with qualifying by crashing. When realistically he should be qualifying in the top 10, and then he's got easy points. Um, he sacrificed his race at the end there for George Russell, but that was always going to happen. Mercedes just done it about 50 laps too late. So yeah, I can't give him any higher than a 4 out of 10.
Agreed. Once again, I've also given him a 4 out of 10. Unfortunate for what happened to him in qualifying. But the same points that I made for Yuki Tsunoda are applicable for Kimi Antonelli. If your qualifying's not good enough, your race is likely to be not good enough. Actually, I can actually talk about the point where I was talking about George Russell cutting the chicane. Why Mercedes did not let him, kind of cut the chicane and continue on, and him having to give back the position, and it bamboozles me because if you're doing it with one driver and you're kind of letting him do his own thing, why have you not let it happen with your other driver? It generally just bamboozles me. But I think Mercedes put their secret Ferrari disguises on, and they were becoming clowns for this weekend, and they certainly did look at that way with their cars kind of scoring no points and just ending up a little bit foolish in the end for Mercedes. But for Antonelli, it's a learning curve once again, and a cruel one. That is because if you make a mistake in Monaco, you have to pay the price for it. And unfortunately, he did, finishing the last of the finishes and the first driver to be lapped 3 times since the dreaded Nikita Mazepin. So yeah, a very, very bad kind of name to be put alongside, and it's something that Kimi Antonelli won't write home about, that's for sure.
On now to Fernando Alonso. He qualified in sixth and didn't finish. I've gone for a 7 out of 10 for Alonso. It would have been easy, easy points had it not been for that mechanical failure, and it probably would have been an 8 or a 9 as well had he finished. But he didn't. So you got to give him credit though for what he did, and it's a 7 because he was looking very strong.
I've gone with a 6 actually. The thing is, whenever we do these for drivers that retire, it's very hard. And it could have been a points finish for Fernando Alonso, but due to the mechanical problems in his Aston Martin car, he had to DNF from the race. So I've gone with a 6 out of 10. And I'm going to round it up quickly just with Pierre Gasly. Yeah, what he did, bamboozling, just decided to plow straight back into, I believe it was Yuki Tsunoda, actually, if I'm not mistaken. That's definitely dropped his grade down a bit. I've given him a 3 out of 10. I think qualifying to begin with wasn't brilliant, and then ruining your race by just plowing into the back of someone. Just another kick in the teeth. So yeah, I've gone with a 3 out of 10 for Pierre Gasly and a 6 out of 10 for Fernando Alonso.
So for me, I've gone for a 2 out of 10 for Pierre Gasly. He's thrown his race away. He's just gone straight into the back of the Yuki Tsunoda. I think he came out and said that Tsunoda moved on the braking or something like that, which I didn't see from watching the replays. Um, but I think what's worse is that he's actually tried to keep going. In a situation like that, you go down the side route, you're not going to go. Your left front has been ripped off, very similar to Charles Leclerc a few years ago. He's not going anywhere, and the fact he's tried to make it back to the pits is awful. And you would have thought that he should have been given a penalty, given that is a new directive from the FIA. If you can't keep going, then you've got to stop and pull over. But he didn't, and yeah. But even still, poor qualifying, and then poor in the race as well. Threw it away, hit early with the aggressive strategy, but no, nothing to happening. And then moving on to our Monaco predictions. So we'll kick things off with our star predictions. And I got 1 out of 2 here. So I had 2 or more drivers to pit on lap 1, which obviously came out. I think there was 4 in the end that pit. And then I had Alonso points, which was frustratingly taken away with that mechanical failure.
And for me, I also got 1 out of 2. I predicted correctly that Leclerc would be on the podium, which brought a massive smile to my face. My second predictions was 3 DNFs, and I got 2. So if Antonelli just decided to peel in the pits, it would have been happy days for me. But instead, he decided to be lapped 3 times, and it was a bit of bit of a sad one for me, but yeah, 1 out of 2 for me there.
And then moving on to the qualifying predictions and the race predictions, I'll go all at once because I got zero. Because I put the same top five for qualifying in the race. I had Verstappen, Piastri, Norris, Russell, Leclerc, and they were completely wrong. Almost with um, Piastri, I put him second rather than third, but in the end, not to be.
Happy days for me because I decided to vary my top five in the race ever so slightly so I could have a little bit of an advantage. So for qualifying, I went Piastri, Verstappen, Norris, Russell, Leclerc. Russell nowhere to be seen. And I mean there was four out of the top five there, but just done the wrong order. But in the race, I actually decided to drop Verstappen down 2 places into fourth, and he finished fourth. So I had Piastri, Norris, Leclerc. So the top three was there, just in the wrong order. I had Verstappen in fourth, which I predicted correctly, and then I had Russell in fifth. But it was actually Lewis Hamilton who qualified fifth. So for me, I've taken 1 point out of your advantage, which I'll take. But I still don't think that's enough. It's nowhere near enough.
Anyway, moving on to F2 and F3. So in the F2 sprint race, Kush Maini won. Um, he finished ahead of Gabriel Mini and Luke Browning in the high tech. And then in the feature race, as we alluded to earlier on, there was a massive pile up at turn one where I think it was a good sort of 7 or 8 drivers ended up retiring, and a lot more suffered extensive damage. I think the feature race was actually drawn early as a result because it took that long to clear it up. And I think it actually finished behind a safety car, I want to say. Jack Crawford won there with Fornaroli and Montoya rounding up the top three. And what that means in the standings is that Luke Browning is now the leader of the top of the championship with 70 points. Alex Dunn, after only picking up 3 points, is on 67, with Fornaroli on 64 in third, Vashaw on 59, and then Jack Crawford getting his win in the feature race is on 56 in fifth place. And then moving on to the F3 in Monaco this weekend, Stenshorn won the sprint race with Nicholas Solov winning in the feature race. Belinsky and Boyer rounded up the podium places for that. And then in the championship, Camara is the leader still with 77 points. Tim Tramnitz on second place with 64 points, and Solov moves up to third on 61 points, closing the gap dramatically. Stromstead drops to fourth on 52 and Tappinen on 51. What do you make of the F2 and F3 action? Did you catch much of it this weekend?
Yeah, I actually did. It was interesting through both categories because the qualifying formats are completely different to what Formula One actually gives. So there's actually two qualifying sessions in both junior categories. So the qualifying A and a qualifying B, which consists of the it's a weird format that F2 and F3 have. So it's actually odd numbered drivers go first, so they're in a qualifying session together, and then even numbered drivers are in a qualifying session together, and kind of the aggregate lap times compared to one another is how the grid is kind of formatted. If that makes sense for the sprint race and the feature race, it's quite confusing. It's not as easy as Formula One. They like to have it a little bit different in F2 and F3. But in F3, I was very surprised with Rafa Camara because I thought he'd be much stronger than he was in Monaco. He got himself also a 3 place grid drop in qualifying, which kind of impacted him in the sprint race and the feature race. So it was surprising in that aspect. But Nikola Zolov, the Bulgarian, for his first ever F3 pole. I think it's his third season in Formula 3, and it's his first pole, and he obviously got that feature race to win as well, which boosted him up to third place, only 16 points behind Rafa Camara. And then looking sort of into F2, the crash between the two kind of drivers at the front of Alex Dunn and Victor Martins. I don't know what Alex Dunn is doing. I think Victor Martins has pretty much got the move done on the outside, and he just decides to sort of plow into him in a sense. But it's let's call it racing. Because I think no one wants to lose the place at the front in Monaco, especially how important it is to keep yourself on pole position and keeping yourself in first place heading into turn one. And Alex Dunn wasn't wanting to kind of give that one up. But when it's when it's a driver, going round your outside and he's clearly making the move and you're just slamming the door completely on him, smashing him into the barrier, it's a little bit naughty. And that's why he's been given a 10 place grid drop for Spain because of a lap one incident in Monaco in the feature race. But very impressive from Luke Browning. He continues his consistency and moves up into the championship lead, the fifth driver in F2 to claim a championship lead. Alex Dunn, like you mentioned, drops down to second. Leo Fornaroli has done a fantastic job, the Invicta racing driver, who's the current F3 champion, moves himself up to third. But I think if you actually look at both championships, they're definitely now wide open. After Camara had his sort of mistakes in Monaco and Browning taking the beneficiary of Alex Dunn's mistake in the feature race. So both championships are very much wide open. And I think there's obviously a lot of driver academies in both categories. Luke Browning representing Williams and Rafa Camara representing Ferrari. So the two drivers in the championship leads there look very good for their money, but I'm sure it will still change a whole lot because there's still a lot of rounds to go. And like we mentioned, there's a sprint race and a feature race in Formula Two and Formula Three, so anything can certainly happen in those categories.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have a look forward to Spain now. So we'll have a look at our predictions. Do you want to kick things off with your two-star predictions?
Yes, I certainly can. For my first star prediction, I've gone for Piastri to outqualify Lando Norris. I think Lando Norris is sort of on the ascendancy at the moment, and Andrea Stella has alluded to that in his kind of post-race notes. And I think I want to see a little bit of fight from Oscar Piastri, and I want to see a little bit of grit and desire from the young Australian to keep a hold of his championship lead. And for my second one, I've actually gone with Alonso points. Home race, Aston Martin have looked good apart from their mechanical issue with Monaco, and I think the curse will finally be broken in Spain around the streets of Barcelona. Well, not the streets, but the track of Barcelona. You know what I mean.
For me, for my two-star predictions, I've gone for double Williams points. They've been on a good run of form. So I've gone for double points and Behrman to outqualify Esteban Ocon. I think I can see a good Behrman performance in qualifying coming through here. And then moving on to qualifying, I've gone for Max Verstappen from Lando Norris, Charles Leclerc, Oscar Piastri, and George Russell, the top five. I think that with this new directive, that will bring Verstappen into play and maybe bridge the gap slightly to Ferrari as well. See Ferrari getting a little bit closer with this.
So for qualifying, I've actually gone for a McLaren 1-2. I've gone with Piastri over Norris, Leclerc in third, Verstappen in fourth, and Hamilton in fifth. I still think that the two McLarens will be out in front. Verstappen obviously is very competitive wherever he goes, but I think he'll be sandwiched between the two Ferraris who I think will finally come good on a racetrack like Spain and sort of back their podium in Monaco with another podium.
And then for the race, I've gone for Verstappen again to take the victory, and then Piastri to lead Norris, with Leclerc and Hamilton rounding off the top.
And then for the race, I've gone with Lando Norris actually taking the victory, overtaking Oscar Piastri, who finishes second for me. I've gone with Leclerc sticking in third place, Hamilton making the move on Verstappen to finish fourth. I think this Hamilton's sort of needing a little bit of luck, and I think he will get some luck in Spain. And like I mentioned, Verstappen will finish in fifth.
And that is everything for this episode of On the Grid Podcast. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back next week where we'll be reviewing our predictions, looking back at the Spanish Grand Prix, and then enjoying a week off after a triple header, the final part this weekend. Thank you all for listening and goodbye.